welcome to you all today. It's going to be a really good time. I'd like to just say a few words about Ken. He's a retired school teacher and a non-stipendiary minister. For those of you who don't know, it means he doesn't get any money for it. He taught geography as a senior teacher for 36 years in 4 schools on 2 continents, including 4 years in a remote corner of Zambia. He also taught for 20 years at Glen School, Epsom, where he had a senior role as head of the Faculty of Humanities. He is passionate about Africa, as I am, and taught it extensively in his professional career. He's traveled to many parts of the world, including Uganda, where he was teaching at a clergy conference for the Diocese of Kampala, and he's taught in Malawi with Hope for Malawi. A graduate of the University of Sussex, he has a diploma from All Nations Christian College and a PGCE from the University of London. Now, you like this, it's a long time ago. He was ordained in 1998. Wow. And his ordained ministry has included 10 years as a part-time vicar of Albury, near Guildford, where he witnessed substantial growth in the church. He's also had a lifetime's experience of working with children, families, and young people. He uses his teaching skills and experience to make the Bible come alive. He has been at St. John's Church, Stoney, for the last few years, but I'm glad to say he's returned now to St. Paul's as part of the team here. So could you welcome Ken up, please?
Well, thank you, Clive. I don't recognise myself on that. And on the business of being non-stipendiary, which in the jargon of the Church of England, you know what that means, the boys at school used to say to me, "Sir, do you get paid for all this vicaring you do?" And I replied, "No, but the fringe benefits are out of this world." Also, when I go and speak at other places, I often use this line. I hope you'll laugh. I've been headhunted to speak at the first Food for Thought lunch, and a friend of mine says it's called scraping the bottom of the barrel. And there are more famous Christians than me coming in the series. I think you know who some of them are, and we'll give you a little bit of information right at the end this morning. So, what is the world coming to? Perennial question in the field of science, culture, and so on. And in a moment, I'm going to focus on the planet, which is our home. But we do, of course, have other great concerns about the future. The destruction of peace, the destruction of community, the destruction of trust, the destruction of authority, even the destruction of gender as we know it, the disintegration of the family, the constant reincarnation of dictatorships, invasion, and wars, and the impact, and highly relevant this week if you're listening to the news, of the impersonal digital world where life is controlled by algorithms and artificial intelligence, AI. I'm told, incidentally, that there will be a website soon for clergy where the AI chatbot will write your sermon for you. That makes life easy. I hope in the course of these events we will cover some at least and touch on a number of issues that are real. Now, early May is the mysterious season in the church's year called rogation. It means asking for God's blessing on the sown crops. And in traditional rural parishes, the custom was, as you may know, to walk around the parish boundary, known as beating the bounds. What it does highlight is the very special relationship that we have with our environment. We have the regular global conferences, which have received a lot of publicity in recent years, the COP conferences. You remember Glasgow in 2021 and Sharm el-Sheikh in 2022. I find myself asking the question when you hear the politicians talking, what do priests and politicians have in common? I think the answer is answering questions that no one is asking. Or alternatively, avoiding the direct questions in the first place. In Barack Obama's book, The Promised Land, which I recommend, he describes going to a political meeting in the Midwest somewhere, and it didn't go all that well. And on the way back, he said to one of his aides in the car, that didn't go very well. And the aide said, that's because you tried to answer the question. And I think it is the need for fellowship and encouragement together about these issues, but also the need for relevance and application, actually, in our Christian discipleship. And I hope that these lunches with the talks will inform, stimulate, encourage, and even question some things. Now, as Christians, we believe three things which are given, what we call a priori. The universe was created by God. The universe is sustained by God. In the book of Hebrews, it says, sustaining all things by his word of power. And the fact that God is involved in our world is why the miraculous becomes possible. And God has a plan for the universe. He's the creator and the sustainer, and in his Son, he's the savior of a flawed humanity and a fallen creation. The centerpiece of his creation is us, humanity. Mankind, the old phrase, but humanity perhaps. And the context of humanity, you and I, is the physical environment in which we live. There is a spiritual environment, there is a moral environment, but we actually live also in this physical environment. So where do we start? Well, I don't know whether you've seen these, but the latest pictures from the Webb telescope, that's the successor to Hubble, pictures like this, and the definition isn't great on these Google images, but the real thing are very impressive. These pictures, this is the Towers of Creation Nebula, some of the most distant in the planet, dating from the dawn of time. It is a picture of awesome grandeur. On a smaller scale is our planet. What we call the Goldilocks effect here. You know that Goldilocks, just right. If we were too near, we'd fry, as far as the sun is concerned. If we were too far away, we freeze. And a Christian perspective on this is a quote from C.S. Lewis. Now, you remember C.S. Lewis, of course, as the Narnia Chronicles author. He also wrote a science fiction trilogy, 3 books, in fact. And in one of them, called Out of the Silent Planet, 2 angels are in space. Now, the theology of being out there is something we could talk about over lunch, actually. But the 2 angels are talking, and they look at the planet, and they say, what's special about that? And that one says to the other, that is the visited planet. For me personally, as Clive kindly said, my whole professional life has been about the economic and physical environments that make up this extraordinary and unique planet that is our collective home. Like John Wesley, I'm proud to say the world is my parish. Now, let me say before I go really into some of this quickly now, I'm not an eco-warrior. I'm not a member of the Green Party. I'm not actually a political activist or a member of professional protesters like Extinction Rebellion or Just Stop Oil, but I am committed to the principle of creation care. And I thought I'd think about this in 3 ways this morning, 3 very simple ways. Firstly, a geographical perspective. Secondly, a biblical perspective. And thirdly, a practical perspective. Now, if we turn to the geographical perspective first, and some of these I'll spend longer on others, so if you're thinking about how long is he going to go on for, I'm watching the clock. The areas of concern, so what is going wrong with the world, and where on earth are we going? The care and maintenance of the planet is now at the top of the political and economic agenda. We all know about it now. I just to say that 40 years ago, I was teaching this in those days, and we geographers have been talking about this for a very long time. But let me just show you, first of all, before I go to the next slide, let me just show you 2 things. The first is this, and this is a Times press cutting. Hotter than ever world adds fear to climate change. Nishi, I'm holding this up so people on the film can see it. The date of this Times press cutting, well, that's January the 6th, 1996. The 1996, the same year, this population data sheet was produced. And if you're interested in any particular country, okay, the figures have changed, but the proportions and the percentages are the same. This gives every country in the world. It's probably available online now. I'm Jurassic now in the past. But on this you will get all the statistics and figures about what's going on. But what about this quote? Let me read it to you. Well, what is the world coming to? Can we go to the next picture? And the next one, sorry, yeah. Man is endowed with reason and the power to create so that he may increase that which is given to him. But until now, he has not created but demolished. The forests are disappearing, the rivers are running dry, the game is exterminated, the climate is spoiled, and the earth becomes poorer and uglier every day. Now, that was not a statement from one of the COP conferences. That was written by the author Chekhov in 1897. Here are 6 areas of concern that are part of this anxious debate. The first one, and look at these figures on the screen now, is about population growth. Look at the figures that you can see on the screen and do the math, as the Americans say. Estimates at the time of Christ, 250 million. We know that a little bit from Roman censuses and what we know. It's surmising, but that seems to be approximate. By the Elizabethan period and the world explorers and people like Francis Drake sailing the world, the estimate was 500 million. By 1830, we'd passed into the period of the first organized censuses in the world, in the Western world. The figure was 1 billion. And then 100 years later, it was 2 billion. And look how fast that is going up. Particularly look at the doubling time. 1,600 years to double to 500 million. 230 years to double to 1 billion. 100 years. And if you go to 1976, you will see that the doubling time then, a mere 30 or so years. So an astonishing population growth. And if you look at the next picture, you'll see what that looks like in graphical form. We've just about reached 8 billion people now at the end of last year. The N word is an exponential increase in population. What is significant about this is not just the absolute numbers, but where it is happening. It is happening in those areas of the world least able to sustain it. What I'm going to call the rest of this talk, in general, the majority world. We use the third world or developing world. I prefer the expression, the majority world. And why is this happening? And the reason is this. It's not that people are having more and more children. We, the West, have exported death control, but not birth control. And that's what's actually happened. If you look at the next slide, and those of you who did A-level geography years ago will remember that. I hope you did that when you were in school. Look at the two lines, okay? The top line, the red line is the birth rate, and the blue one is the death rate. And you can see the stages that countries go through based on the experience of us in the West, the United States, and so on. It took from the Industrial Revolution through to the present day to go to the far end of what's called the demographic transition. Notice the way that death rate falls. Notice the fact that birth rate stays high. So this population growth, which is superimposed at the top, on the line over the top, this population growth, again, may I repeat, is not because people are having more children. It's because of death control, more children to survive, to grow up. And even after those awful pictures from Afghanistan this week that many of us saw, despite all that, this is what is happening. Birth rates remain stubbornly high in the majority world. And that's the complication of culture, culture of large families, of no state social welfare, of ignorance or even suspicion of family planning, the fact that the responsibility for parenthood remains with the culture, with the village, so the individualism of the West is not there in the majority world. Babies become the child of the community. So individual parents are released from the responsibility, financial responsibility of bearing all these children. These are quite complicated and important issues. The conquest of world killer diseases, the export of death control, clean water in many parts of the world, but not everywhere, all of this has contributed to population growth. And we are obviously producing and consuming more carbon as the world population increases, and progressively we industrialize. That's my first area of concern. The second one is now that what is this? Here is a famous church, Albury Old Church. Seen for the, you wonder why I've got this here. You know, he's on about Albury again. I'll explain why in just a moment. You can wake up now, okay? That old church, Saxon Church with certain Norman additions and so on, is maintained by the Church's Conservation Trust. It is the venue for many films and commercials. It was the venue for 4 weddings and a funeral. And if you watch television over Easter, it was where they were filming Agatha Christie's film, Why Didn't They Tell Evans? But the connection with Albury is not that. The connection with Albury lies in the fact of this guy you can see on the screen. His name, Thomas Malthus. He was a vicar of Albury, one of my predecessors. The year is 1798. And he wrote a tract. He was a bit of an economist. He wrote a tract, or published a booklet really called A Summary View, this is the title, A Summary View of the Principle of Population. And what Malthus said was, population growth will increase, and the maths among you, well, mathematicians will understand this, population will grow at a geometric ratio like this, that is 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. But what he called the means of subsistence, or food supply, which we geographers call the carrying capacity of the environment, that will go up arithmetically. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Imagine the 2 like that. And then, of course, as you can see in that graph, the suggestion is it might level off, but in Malthus's thinking, actually, population will drop down to get into line with food supply. Best way of illustrating that is something like the rabbit population. Do you remember myxomatosis? Vast increases in rabbits, and then suddenly disease strikes, and population goes back into line with the environment, with the carrying capacity. And Malthus said that population will be brought back into line by what he called misery, vice, and moral restraint. That was what he thought. Now, that was in 1798. Malthus's predictions, gloomy predictions, doomsday predictions, never actually materialized in the 19th century. And the reason they never materialized in the 19th century was because of 3 things. A, the progressive industrialization of the Western world. Secondly, the development of new lands for food supply, particularly the North American prairies, but also the lands in what we call the Russian steppes, part of what is now Ukraine, and the advent of contraception. Malthus regarded contraception as a form of vice. No moral restraint, he said. So he predicted then this doomsday disaster, but it never actually happened, as you saw in the figures of population growth that I gave you earlier on. Now, what now? Well, there's a new doctrine, and sorry for long words, there is a new doctrine in the thinking on these things called neo-Malthusianism. In other words, the new ideas, because Malthus's ideas have been revived. They've been revived because we have escalating population. When we get to question time at the end, I'll put them on the spot now. I'd like to ask Mark and Sarah about the population of Malawi in particular as an illustration of this. That with the escalating population has come the fact that we have now got no new lands to colonize. And that's why his ideas have taken root again. The only way we can grow more food is to intensify agriculture, factory farming, hydroponics, and to deforest. So that was Malthus's view of world population growth. And when you look at what's happening in the world, particularly the numbers and the consumption of resources, which I'll come to in just a moment, and the production of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, so much of it is because we have so many people in the world. And yet, the reality is, it's been said we could sustain a population of 12 billion if food and resources were evenly distributed. I'm not going to bombard you with statistics, but I'm told that the Western world spends more money on birdseed than it does on foreign aid. Population explosion, resource depletion. The third one, and more briefly on these, the third one I've called runaway technology. What Alvin Toffler called 50 years ago in his prophetic book, Future Shock. The future has caught up with us. The third wave of agriculture and industry comes technology and information. And our capacity to overexploit and intervene has created enormous environmental and ethical issues, including pollution. And then, of course, we have the runaway technology of artificial intelligence in our time. The fourth area of concern, and these in some ways are all interrelated, is climate change itself. There have always been fluctuations in the world's climate. You may know this. It's caused by irregularities in the Earth's orbit. The reason why we had 4 ice ages in the last million years is because of changes in the inclination of the Earth, because the Earth is 23.5 degrees, but actually it moves over a period of many thousands of years, and the solar distance, the distance to the sun, because the Earth goes in an elliptical orbit. So there will be occasions when those two movements coalesce, and when the Earth is tilted at its lowest point in the sky, and therefore the sun is lower, and at the greatest distance from the sun, that triggers the ice age, and ice ages are triggered by about 1.5 degrees centigrade. Now you've heard that figure, about 2050, 1.5 degrees centigrade heating. So very, very small things happen. These irregularities in the Earth's orbit are, somebody has described them as a pacemaker for the ice ages. And a rise of 1.5 degrees will trigger the opposite. We geographers would say we are nearing the end of the current interglacial, and the Earth should be cooling. The evidence for climatic change is imprinted in geology, in landscapes, geomorphology, ice cores, tree ring dating, permafrost retreat, glaciers, and so on. But we now have this unprecedented man-induced climate change. The consumption and dependence on hydrocarbons, deforestation, and cattle production as well is very significant. Now, the forests are the lungs of the Earth. But there are other things happening. See, with population growth, you're increasing pressure on food supply, and one of the ways in which the world feeds itself is through rice, paddy rice fields. Paddy rice fields, and those of you who've been to Asia will have seen this, paddy rice fields generate what we would call marsh gas, methane. Methane is 25 times more powerful as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And as for the disappearance of the forests and replacing it with cattle ranching, cattle generate methane. They fart. You heard it in St. Paul's. And this is what's going on, and as Al Gore said in his book, this is an inconvenient truth, climate change. The fifth area of concern, briefly, these last two, is what's called planned obsolescence. The American author Vance Packard in 1960 wrote this book called The Waste Makers. And what that's about is it's cheaper to throw something away than repair it. Something goes wrong in the kitchen, your toaster, you can now recycle it, but you dump it and go and buy a new one, £15 from Amazon. Do you remember the old boy in Ewell Village who had a little electrical store who could he would rewire a toaster? You know, that never happens now, does it? Planned obsolescence. And the way we organize our economies are a testament to consumerism as well. And the final one, and overarching all of this, is what I would just say, poverty and equality. I'm not going to give you a lot of statistics. 80% of the world's wealth is owned by 20% of the world's people. And some of you may remember, as long ago as 1980, the Brandt Report, Willy Brandt, the UN Commission on Development, produced the famous book North-South, A Program for Survival. Those are 6 areas of concern that I have, and perhaps we share. More briefly, the second perspective is a biblical perspective. Does Scripture give us any guidance on this anxious debate? You see, the fundamental question is, to whom does the earth belong? Psalm 24, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. God is the creator and the owner. But it's only a partial answer, actually, because in Psalm 115 we read, the highest heavens belong to the Lord, but the earth has been given to man. There is a double truth here. The earth is his because he made it. It is ours because he gave it. And there are, I think, 3 principles within this biblical perspective on us and the environment. The first is this: God has given mankind dominion over the earth. And let me just say the Greek word for dominion here doesn't mean domination. It means to perfect or to complete. God has given mankind dominion over the earth. Genesis says, let us make man in our own image. Let them have dominion over the earth. Again, Genesis says, fill the earth and subdue it. Now, our dominion over the earth is a result of our unique relationship with God. There is order or even a hierarchy in creation. God has set us midway between himself as creator and the rest of creation. We have shared DNA. We are constructed of the same building blocks of matter. And in this sense, we are like animals, but we are not. We are unlike animals. We are like God. We think, we reason, we choose, we create, we pray, and we exercise dominion. We combine dependence on God with dominion over nature. Now, looking back in history, generally speaking, mankind has obeyed the Genesis command to fill the earth and subdue it, a process of food gathering to farming, domestication and cultivation, the discovery and utilization of natural resources. In his progressive control of the earth, man has not been invading God's private sphere or wresting control from him. He's not stopped up the gaps where God used to be. He's provided in the earth all the resources of food, water, clothing, shelter, energy that we need. The great scientist Kepler said, science is thinking God's thoughts after him. True in the physical sciences, but also true in the environmental sciences as well. So God has given mankind dominion over the earth. Secondly, our dominion is cooperative dominion. In exercising our God-given dominion, we are not creating the processes of nature, we are cooperating with them. Genesis suggests that the earth was already fertile and fruitful before man arrived on the scene. And our task is to make the earth more fruitful. And despite the painful effects of the fall, in terms of toil, we are cooperating with the laws of fruitfulness that God has already established. We have come of age technologically, but the forces and power of nature are still by and large beyond our control. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, hurricanes, and tsunamis are great examples. So we do have the power, unlike animals, to change and influence our environment, but we remain dependent on the Creator who gives us rain, sunshine, and fruitful seasons. Our dominion is a cooperative dominion. And thirdly, our dominion is a delegated responsibility. Now, we've had our house in Cheam now for, 17 years. I'm looking for Margaret. Otherwise, I'll get... She's up there. How long we had the house in Cheam? 18 years. For 6 years of that, we had tenants. They had a responsibility, where possible, to maintain and look after the property for which they've been instructed. You know that Jesus' parable of the vineyard reminded his hearers about when the owner sent his servants along, and then eventually he sent his son. We know what the significance of that is in terms of the person and work of Christ. But behind all that, the people in the vineyard were tenants, but they wanted to be the owners. And we are made in God's image and his vice-regent. And God makes us, in a very literal sense, the managers and caretakers of his property. I'll move on. Dominion is not a synonym for destruction. It's about a delegated responsibility to care for our planet. And the three key words on the screen you'll see are dominion, cooperation, and stewardship. Finally, a practical perspective. Now, I don't know about you, I listen to lots of preachers and lecturers and talkers and so on. They love the expression, and finally. So what? The director of Kew Gardens said this: if Christians believe that the earth belongs to the Lord, then we should be at the forefront of the battle to release creation from bondage. And I put a composite slide up on the screen now, and you can see some of what's going on here that we all know about, and pick them out in particular, obviously solar panels, electric cars, hydroelectric power. Top center is a tidal power station in France called La Rance. The one below that in the middle is a wave power, because there's in vast amounts of energy. You obviously know about wind power. The debate's going on now about whether we have nuclear energy, and if we do, should it go micro? And then you can see geothermal on the bottom right, and then biofuels, etc. Now, somebody had a debate with me about electric cars. Margaret and I have an electric car. The person was saying to me, you need hydrogen. Hydrogen engines are the thing for the future. I don't know how long we've got before that can become commonplace. What about biofuels, he said. I said, well, if you wanted to grow enough crops to turn into biofuels to supply the energy needs of this country, you'd need to cover 2/3 probably of the United Kingdom. And that would be food production disappearing. There is no magic bullet, and it's not easy. But I think behind all that, there are certain things that we need to think about. And this is my closing points, really, in many ways. Somebody said to me once, we can save money, or we can save the planet. What we do may bring financial savings in the long term, but will benefit the next generation, probably without financial benefit to ourselves. We have solar panels on our roof, and the question I'm always asked is, what is the payback time? For rich Christians like us, in an age of hunger, I don't think that's the right question. I think we need to see what we can do from our wealth, and we have not just this particular thing, but other things as well. We can see what we do as an investment in creation care. That's why the A Rocha movement is so important. A Rocha is an ecological Christian ecology centre in the Algarve, and it's a movement that's spread around the world. The motive for conservation, I think, is that for the Christian, is that the earth is the Lord's. And we see all around us the destructive effect of globalization and multinationalism. So what levels of involvement are there? Well, here are a few bits and pieces. You're familiar with these, 3 R's, reduce, reuse, and recycle. I'm sure we can have conversations, and all of us, many of us do quite a lot of this stuff, and it's right that we do so. Also, at another level as well, take a look at this. Local levels. Now, this photograph was taken a few years ago. The Albury village is in the top bottom corner. Up above there is liquid gas coming out of, or gas being extracted from a landfill tip. I was on the landfill liaison committee in Albury with the local council for managing the largest landfill in the whole of south of England. And what they did was that when they closed the landfill, and it's been closed, or it will be closed for 25 to 30 years before you can walk over the top of it, pipes all over it, and they take the gas and they put it in there, and it's used to power refuse trucks. The problem with that was Albury claimed at that time to be the first carbon neutral village in the country. The problem is, of course, is that it's still a hydrocarbon. Still a hydrocarbon. And that's why the idea of using other forms of energy is so important. But at a local level, we can think about that. And it's expensive. I remember pointing out to a few people around here, I'm old now, so I don't have a job to hold on to. This south-facing roof here, massive possibilities with solar energy on this south-facing roof overlooking Northey Avenue. And another picture as well. Here we go. Look, what about this? I hope we do all this. And maybe you're not a biker, but you could take the bus or the train, or you can turn down your central heating. Just to highlight at the bottom right, at the bottom left, the ULEZ zone is highly controversial here now, highly political, highly controversial. Don't get me on this particularly now, but I did write to Sadiq Khan, pointing out all the errors of his current planning, despite being concerned for the pollution and the environment. But that's another story. I did get a letter back from his chief environmental advisor. And the next one, global. Do you remember this campaign many years ago? Make poverty history. I only ever once in my life, Margaret and I went on a protest march in London, and that was on that. But there are other issues that we can take a stand for and lobby our MPs and so on, and just encourage our politicians and our leaders to do this. You see, God is concerned and interested in his creation and how we manage it. He's not just interested in what goes on inside a church building. And so you put the question then, what is the world? What is the world coming to? Well, the Christian worldview is linear, not circular, as in the religions of the East. We believe in incarnation, not reincarnation. The gospel is ultimately about the redemption of humanity and the redemption of creation. History has a purpose and a destiny. there will one day be a new heavens and a new earth. We had a church notice poster on occasion when I was in Albury, which says, hope for planet Earth. And it was a picture of the Earth. Owner returning soon. But it's too big an issue, we say. We can't control what's happening in China as the great polluter, or the United States and other the great polluters of the world. We can't do that. But we can take some responsibility for the little bit of the world that I've got responsibility for. And I like the story, as you know, of the starfish on the beach, where the little boy's throwing the starfish back and the grown-up says to him, what difference will it make? And he'll say, make a difference to that one. Make a difference to that one, because there is hope. There is hope. And I finish with that, basically. Geographical perspective, biblical perspective, practical perspective, in about 25 minutes, 30 minutes. Thank you for being so patient. And those who are asleep, you can wake up now. Final thought. There was a great series of correspondence in the Times before the war, in the 1930s apparently. And the theme was, what is wrong with the world? And people wrote in about what was going on. It was the education system, it was the law, all these other things that were wrong with the world. And the correspondence was brought to an end by this letter, which said this to the Times, editor of the Times, what is wrong with the world? Dear Sir, I am, yours faithfully, G.K. Chesterton. Thank you for listening.
So we're going to take questions now.
Jan's got a question.
I was wondering whether the tilting of the Earth has got more to do with global warming than we realise.
That may be correct, but the sequence of the glaciations in the last million years suggests the Earth is getting colder. So actually the tilt is altering, and it alters on something like 37,000-year cycle. So it's not something we've seen in our lifetime, obviously. But I think that the jury's open on that one. If you look at what's happened in the last million years, we should have another ice age some stage in the future. Human intervention in climate suggests to me that that process is being slowed down or possibly even stalled. I don't think we know the answer to that question. Peter.
Would the ultimate effect of that make colder winters and hotter summers if that trend continued?
Yeah, I think the question and the unknowns really is the sequence of extreme events. I mean, we just had a terrible hurricane in Malawi, for example, and we've seen what Mark and Sarah were doing in that. We get these events happening, and the problem is that when statisticians, meteorologists, and all the people who know about these things look at the figures, they're looking at average figures, which have to iron out the fluctuations we get, and it's the frequency of these events that happens. So every time there's a major flood or something like that, people say, is this because of global warming? The answer is it's part of a trend. We are moving in, it's a trend and not necessarily just an instantaneous thing. You heard of El Nino, haven't you? The warming of the Pacific. Well, that's coming back later this year, apparently. And we don't know yet what effect that will have. We know that it's caused terrible flooding in eastern Australia and places like that. And then we get droughts, we get the forest fires, all the things we see. So these extreme events, the concern, I think, among the scientific establishment is that the frequency of these extreme events is increasing. I think it's that more than anything else. But you may have, it's been a very cold, wet spring, hasn't it? Shivering in March and April. What's all this stuff about global warming? Well, yeah. Thanks, Peter. Marguerite.
Is there anything at all positive about climate change?
No. I think no. I don't like saying that. We may say, and Monty Don will tell you he's going to adapt his garden for Mediterranean climates, and looking at pictures from the south of Spain at the moment and seeing Margaret's cousin in by their swimming pool in the south of Spain and enjoying the sunshine, and we think we could do with some of that here. I think the global realities are very, very, I'm not being doomsday particularly, but I think there's going to be a dramatic alteration in the way that we conduct our affairs, the way that life is organized, how we deal with water shortages, for example. You know, there could be already hosepipe ban in the southwest already. You know, hosepipe bans around here, things like that. Do we spend money on infrastructure like desalination plants? We've had a desalination plant mothballed in the East End of London for several years now. How do we go about this? I think that there is a huge debate going on, really, about what we ought to do and the manner in which we approach it. They're talking about 1.5 degrees centigrade by 2050 from the time of the Industrial Revolution. It's only a very small difference, but it's very, very small changes in average temperatures that trigger immense changes in the overall pattern of the weather and the climate. Yeah. So I wish I could be more optimistic. I mean, I'm optimistic about the future in a Christian sense, but I am concerned about the future as a geographer, basically, and the landscape and what not my adult children, particularly my grandchildren, and they know about this now. They're taught in primary school about this, and they are saying, "Granddad, we know about this and we're worried about it." Yeah. Mark.
When I look at the production of energy and the hydrocarbons, it's really on a vast global scale. But when we use them individually, and the changes that we make are really very, very small. So that if you look for, I don't wish to criticize your choice of electric car, but if you were to look at the carbon impact of having to change the factories, the electrical distribution network and everything to actually produce that car, it probably would save very, very little. Do you think really that we have to do something on a vast scale? For instance, burying enormous quantities of carbon dioxide in the oil wells that we've nicely dug them out of? It seems to me that we have to do something enormous to actually make much of a difference. And personally, I feel defeated by making small changes.
Thank you, Colin. I think the point's apposite and relevant. I know that my electric car's footprint and the lithium battery that drives it, etc., and lithium is a wasting asset as well, you know, etc. There is no magic bullet. There is no. We have to find somehow a best fit that embraces the world, and I think I take the point. You know, you could argue that just carry on driving your diesel car, whatever. So I just think it's a very difficult question. I think I, as a Christian geographer, we were trying to make a sort of moral and environmental judgment about what we do here. And we felt that this was an appropriate thing to do, but I agree totally. I mean, our percentage contribution to global warming or to CO2 in the atmosphere is tiny, and it's reducing in relation to what the USA, for example, produces. So I've got no answer except that when I drive into Cheam, I'm very glad that I'm not putting any fumes into the atmosphere as you go shopping in Cheam. But yes, Mark.
Ken, you asked about population growth in Malawi, and it is fair to say there's been quite a lot of growth in the probably last 20, 30 years. The average age is about 18, which shows you there's a lot of growth. The population is now about 20 million, and it's not a very big country. That causes lots of problems. It causes deforestation because everyone uses wood to cook their food. And that has all sorts of other climate problems, and also a lot of the problems with mudslides come from lack of trees. It's also causing problems that the government can't afford to subsidise fertiliser because it's just too many people, too much. But I would also just like to pick up on your nice little slide about the birth rate and death rate. If you talk to the guy who at the bank that when we go and cash checks and stuff, he's very well educated. He has 2 kids. He has no plans to have any more because that's a sensible number. He can put them through school. He can look after them. So he is at the far right of your industrialized part of the graph, but there are many other people in Malawi who are still on the left.
Yeah. Sarah.
Yeah, one of the things I've been challenged about is the reusing of things. And I think our generation, I have to get myself in this now, we don't throw things as well away like our children and that generation do. In Malawi, a picture that sticks in my mind of about 10 years ago is a guy with a mountain of shoes and sandals that he was mending, and they all looked as if, they would have been thrown away 10 years ago here. And that challenged me. And since we've been working in schools, if we take anything that's got a package, we don't throw it away. Somebody will take it and use it. And they will mend things to death because they have no option, because they can't afford to go out and buy something new. So I think that's challenged me here is, I don't need to go out and buy the next thing or the next new thing necessarily, or, I can mend or replace a bit more. And I think that could make a big difference for our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren's generation as well.
Thanks, Sarah. I think, just to summarise, if I may, because time is going, a challenge really for us 21st century Christians is the degree to which we absorb the mores of the culture and become addicted to consumption. That, I think, is one of the challenges that we have. I'm just very conscious, because of some of the comments you've made, how difficult it is to produce, if you like, a definitive position on this. But we can, I believe, prayerfully and considerately consider the little bit that we can do, and things will be forced on us eventually through legislation and everything else later, but I think that I think is what the churches are called to do, and the Diocese of Guildford wants to have all its churches carbon neutral by 2030. That's a pretty impossible target. If you've got a Grade 1 listed building in the countryside, it might be easier here. So it's an ongoing challenge, and one I think that people are very concerned about. And the other thing, just to finish on this, Clive, if I may, is to say that this is a concern, if you like, and an issue which is shared with everyone, of faith and no faith, actually. It's just that we as Christians have a particular motivation for doing what we do. Not just the future of the planet and the care of our children, but because this is God's earth, and we're called upon to look after it as best we can. Thank you.